All right, if you're aiming for that 2025 UPSC prelims, you know current affairs are key. We're diving deep today, hitting those topics that might just pop up on your exam.
It's not just about headlines, though, right? We're going to connect those dots, see the bigger picture, just like the UPSC wants you to.
Buckle up then. We're starting with a geography fact that might surprise you. Did you know the world's biggest waterfall is actually underwater?
That's right. It's called the Denmark Strait Cataract between Greenland and Iceland. Pretty chilly spot.
Okay, but under waterfall, how does that even happen?
Well, picture this. Ice Age glaciers carting out the seabed, creating this huge drop. Now you've got super cold, dense water from the Nordic seas flowing down that slope, cascading into the Irminner Sea like a giant underwater waterfall.
Wow. But here's the thing for your prelims. This underwater wonder plays a big role in something called thermohaline circulation. Think of it like a global conveyor belt of ocean currents, driven by differences in water temperature and how salty it is.
And why should you care? Because if that circulation gets disrupted, it can mess with climate patterns worldwide. Remember, UPSC loves to ask about how systems connect, right?
Okay, let's switch gears. International news now. Bangladesh is going nuclear with the Rooppur Nuclear Power Plant. It's being built with help from Russia.
Big step for Bangladesh, aiming to meet a lot of their energy needs with this plant. First time they're venturing into nuclear energy, too. New chapter for them.
Not all smooth sailing, though. There's been talk about possible corruption, costs going way over budget. We're talking over 12 billion US dollars.
Yeah, and geopolitically, it's really interesting. Russia's influence in the region is growing, and this partnership, this nuclear one, might change how Bangladesh interacts with other countries, even India.
Something to watch for sure.
Yeah.
Now let's talk global health. December 27th was the International Day of Epidemic Preparedness. Might seem like a post-pandemic thing, but history tells a different story.
Definitely. Outbreaks have always been around. Important to know the difference. An epidemic is localized, like a measles outbreak in one city. A pandemic, that's global, like COVID-19 was.
Knowing that difference is important for your prelims. UPSC might ask about pandemic history, the WHO, or strong healthcare systems.
Right, and think about how connected it all is. A disease outbreak on one side of the world can become a global issue fast because of travel and trade.
Speaking of global issues hitting close to home, the RBI, they've created this free EAI committee all about using AI ethically and responsibly in finance.
That's a big one because AI is changing finance so quickly, but there are risks. Like algorithms can be biased, leading to unfair lending. Transparency and accountability are super important.
What does it mean for you prepping for UPSC? Expect questions on AI's impact in different sectors, the ethical side of things, and how bodies like the RBI are regulating AI.
Remember, technology and ethics are getting more and more intertwined. UPSC loves that kind of theme.
Now, let's zoom in on a big thing in Indian healthcare, the PM-ABHIM scheme. Made news recently with the Delhi High Court ordering it be implemented in the capital.
PM-ABHIM, that stands for PM-AYUSHMAN Bharat Health Infrastructure Mission. Big investment, over 64,000 crore rupees to make India's healthcare infrastructure stronger. It covers a lot, from rural health centers to advanced disease surveillance.
If you're aiming for the UPSC, know the parts of this scheme. You might get questions on funding, challenges, or the goals. It's important for prelims and mains.
Notice how this scheme aims to close the healthcare gap between urban and rural areas. That's a big concern for policymakers.
All right, quick geography check. Let's start with the Teesta River.
The Teesta starts in the Himalayas, flows through Sikkim and West Bengal, then meets the Brahmaputra in Bangladesh.
Here's why it matters for your UPSC prelims. The Teesta is a big point of tension between India and Bangladesh about water sharing. It's a politically sensitive topic, has big implications for both countries.
Know the river's geography, its path, and those ongoing talks about water management.
Speaking of geography, I saw this interesting news. The Kamarajar Port in Tamil Nadu is booming.
It's north of Chennai, strategically located, operates on this landlord-port model. The port authority is like the landlord and regulator, while private companies run the day-to-day.
That model's meant to attract private investment, make things more efficient. UPSC could ask about it, so understand the concept, the pros and cons.
From rivers to ports to wildlife now. Let's talk about the Sambar Deer. They're often targeted by poachers, sadly. There was an arrest in Arunachal Pradesh recently highlighted this issue.
The Sambar Deer is classified as vulnerable on that IUCN Red List. biggest deer species in India, known for those antlers.
Remember, UPSC isn't just about knowing names of endangered species. It's about understanding why they're declining, like habitat loss, poaching, that human-wildlife conflict.
And while we're on that, let's talk tech and security. Heard of GPS spoofing? It's a cyber attack affecting aircraft more and more, even near India's borders.
GPS spoofing is like sending out fake GPS signals to trick receivers, making them think they're somewhere else. Can mislead aircraft? That's obviously a big deal for safety and security.
Shows how technology can be a tool and a threat. UPSC might ask about what GPS spoofing means for national security, aviation safety, maybe even its use in other areas.
Highlights the need for strong cybersecurity and how technology needs to constantly evolve to counter new threats.
Yeah, it's a complicated thing, impacts lots of areas, aviation, navigation, even tracking wildlife. Speaking of which, did you know GPS tech is used to track endangered animals too, like those Sambar deer?
Oh, really? So the same tech that poachers could use to find them can help protect them too.
Exactly. It's like technology can be good or bad, depends how it's used. UPSC loves to throw those kinds of questions at you, testing if you see how tech, security, and conservation all link up.
Okay, so we've covered a lot. Waterfalls, nuclear plants, epidemics, AI, even wildlife and cybersecurity. What stands out to you thinking about the UPSC exam? Remember, acing the UPSC isn't about memorizing facts, right? It's about connecting the dots, analyzing stuff, seeing the bigger picture. Think about why things happen, what the consequences are.
Like how that Denmark Strait Cataract affects climate through that whole thermohaline circulation thing, geography impacting the whole planet.
Exactly. And think about Bangladesh going nuclear, what that means geopolitically, especially with Russia involved, could really shake things up in the region.
And the ethical side of AI, the RBI's Free AI Committee, it shows we have to make sure AI is fair, transparent, accountable.
These are the kinds of questions the UPSC loves. They want to see you're not just passively learning, but really thinking critically about the implications of everything.
Absolutely. Before we go on, let's recap some key terms. You'll want to know these for your prelims.
We talked about thermohaline circulation. That drives ocean currents worldwide.
Then there's VVER reactors. That's the type being used at that Rooppur Power Plant in Bangladesh.
We also talked about the difference between epidemics and pandemics, how important global health security and cooperation are.
Don't forget AI bias. That's a big concern with AI being everywhere these days. And we talked about the landlord-port model, important for infrastructure development.
And lastly, that GPS spoofing. It's a cybersecurity threat, affects aviation, navigation, even wildlife conservation.
Feeling good about those terms. Great. Now let's dive into another crucial area for your UPSC prep, defense and security. Recently, India and Nepal had their 17th exercise, Surya Kiran, in Uttarakhand.
That joint military exercise, it's all about improving cooperation between the two armies, especially in tough mountain terrain. They work on things like jungle warfare, counterterrorism, and disaster relief.
Shows how much India is committed to security in the region. UPSC might ask about the exercise's goals, who is involved, why it matters for stability.
Here's a little detail that might impress the examiners. The 18th edition is already planned for next year in Nepal. The Indian contingent will be from the 11th Gorkha Rifles.
See, it's those little details that show you've gone deeper than just the headlines. Now let's talk about the economy. Remember that impressive growth at Kamarajar Port?
The ports minister mentioned a whopping 154% increase in cargo handling capacity there over the past 9 years. Shows the government's focus on modernizing ports and boosting trade.
UPSC could ask what's driving that growth. Investments, efficiency improvements, that strategic location. They might even ask about the landlord-port model, which brings in the private sector.
Remember, UPSC is interested in both the economics and the administration side of infrastructure development.
And let's look back to the environment. We talk about the Sambar deer being vulnerable. Important to understand why a species ends up categorized as vulnerable, endangered, or critically endangered on that IUCN Red List.
The IUCN, they use a set of criteria, looking at things like population size, habitat loss, threats from poaching, all that.
For the Sambar deer, habitat loss from deforestation and people encroaching is a big worry. Then you've got poaching, like that arrest in Arunachal Pradesh showed.
Reminds us that conservation needs a multi-pronged approach, not just stopping hunting, but addressing the root causes of habitat loss and why people want wildlife products. And tech plays a role, both in conservation and crime. We talked about GPS spoofing, but GPS itself can be really useful for tracking and monitoring wildlife, too.
Absolutely. Scientists use those GPS collars to see how animals move, where they hang out, how many there are. That data helps make conservation strategies and protect species like the Sambar deer.
It all comes back to connecting those dots, doesn't it? Technology, security, environment, it's all linked in today's world.
And that's what the UPSC exam is all about. It's about seeing those connections, analyzing complex issues, and forming well-rounded opinions.
Okay, future policymakers, got to wrap up this section, but let's do it with a question to get you thinking. We've talked about India's economy growing, infrastructure, the environment. How do you see all this shaping India's future, like on the world stage?
That's a tough one, no easy answers. But it's exactly the kind of thing UPSC wants you to wrestle with. They want people who can look at these big interconnected challenges and give well-thought-out opinions. Exactly.
Yeah.
The exam's not about just spitting out facts, all right?
Yeah.
It's about showing you can think critically, analyze, really understand what India and the world are facing.
Think about India's economy growing, needing more energy. How do they balance that with climate change? How do we build infrastructure without wrecking the environment and hurting biodiversity?
Those are the real dilemmas, right? Policymakers deal with this stuff every day. And UPSC wants to know you're aware of all this, that you can think about it all critically.
And don't forget about the people in all of this. Policies, the economy, tech, it all affects real people's lives.
That's so important. Think about it. Bangladesh and nuclear power. How's that going to change energy access? How much it costs for people there? The PM-ABHIM scheme, will it actually make healthcare better for people?
Exactly. And those AI ethics, that GPS spoofing stuff, those have big consequences for people and whole societies. UPSC wants to see you thinking about the real-world impacts, not just the ideas.
Okay, let's wrap it up. You've got your notes, probably used up a lot of highlighter ink today. What's the one thing you're taking away from all this?
For me, it's that everything's connected. Geography, climate, technology, security, economic choices, they all impact each other. Seeing those connections, that's key to understanding what's going on in the world and doing well on your exam.
Couldn't have said it better. And hey, if you found this deep dive helpful, if it made things click for you, hit that subscribe button and share this with your fellow UPSC preppers. We're in this together, right?
Remember, it's a marathon, not a sprint. Keep that curiosity going, stay focused, and those UPSC goals, you'll get there.
Until next time, happy studying.